the appearance seems very clear. And so when we have an oppressed people, it's very clear that they're all oppressed, right? Like when we see a prisoner camp and we see people starving, we have empathy for all of them. And they all seem like good guys that need to be rescued, right? But is that really what happens when we rescue them all? Or is there some bad guys in there too that just, you know what I mean? Like life is always more complex. And so what I wanted to do is set up very clear sort of boundaries of who is good and who is bad in our perception at this time. But what I wanted to do was get deeper into that. And we did a little bit with the Gluckins this time, where you find out, you think this guy was, Darth Vader or Kingpin, but you really find out he's just a pawn in the game. And he's can possibly be the next product too, right? Like it's a ruthless system. And so in Stranger, I don't know if you played Stranger, but in Stranger's Wrath, there was another evil entity, and it was the head of, sorry, just got a call. I got to tell him I'm producer partner. Okay. I wanted to start showing that they were victims too. They just happened to be on the right side of the money game, so to speak, And so I wanted to show that they will eat their own, and they're really low. And in Stranger, the bad guy was a Glocktigi, which is a higher status than a Gluckin. And they're a parasite where they go over the heads of whoever they take over, and then they'll start impersonating. And you don't realize it's a head on top of a head, like a parasite that shrunk its way on. But they're in a higher status than the Gluckins are. But they're related, because they're all sort of in the realm of the Octigi and the lineages of Octigi. And so the Gluckins are actually pretty low on the power structure, and they're what I would call the C class. And by the C class, I mean like the CEO class, the CFO class, we call it the chief executive class of business today. Now, people think those are the big leaders. And at times you'll get your Elon Musks and your, Steve Jobs, and where the central pillar and personality who created the idea is still running a corporation. But for a large degree, once things become big corporations, this is kind of a class of people that are bred to run them. And that's, and then we get into all different things. When I first saw the first premiere party, I think they called it a coming out party. I'm not sure. It was in New York, and I heard about this because I was starting to get around wealthy kids that were really wealthy. And they were like, oh, well, this is when the girls are presented to society. It's at Madison Square Garden, right? You'll never get a ticket. But this is saying, like, this is our daughter. She will be available for marriage. And she can help a company. We can form relationships within these big families, and we can keep the industries to ourselves, right? This is really what's going on at that level. And I'm oversimplifying everything, but we need a takeoff point to discuss them. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So they're kind of breeding. And if you talk to people, I mean, there's people that have done exposés on their lives, and they're like, look, I was being set up to run a corporation ever since I was a kid. The family business is this. These are the interconnected relationships of the families, and this is why we go to these schools. This is why we're in these societies. This is why the women are presented when they're available. This is why these things happen. And it's just not like, hey, it goes to the best player. It's like maybe you can work your way in from the outside and become successful in that world. And I think technology has allowed more people to do that from the robber baron age. It's like you really do need brilliant minds. You can't just have the flunky kid in the family running a big corporation, because it's a lot more sophisticated these days, and it has to be a lot smarter. But the idea was that the C level is still kind of a different type of worker, and the real power is hidden. And this is really interesting. Like if you go back in world history, there's the Hittites, which they thought was maybe not even a real people, like maybe it was a mythological people, right? The Hittites. And it had largely been erased out of history. And then you find out, no, what they did was they figured out thousands of years ago, and the question is, how much are they still here today? But thousands of years ago, they figured out to rule kings, royal families, kings and queens, royalty, eventually it'll always fail. Eventually, it will always fail because somehow it'll need to be overthrown. And so how do we not be the kings and queens, but how do we place the kings and queens? And then we'll remain secret in power. And when we need to throw a king and a queen and a royal family under the bus, that's what we'll do. And then we'll say, it's a new beginning. And people won't even know we're controlling the strings, but we'll say a revolution occurred. And we toppled that evil king. And now there's a new good king, right? And they're like, you keep believing that because we're hidden. And if we're hidden, we have the ability to really prolong the test of time. But if we're visible, it's only a question before it's either in our lineage, in our era, or it'll be our grandchildren's era, but we'll be overthrown.
And there seems to be something hidden in Oddworld also behind all of these glucons and everything that has to do with that class of characters, almost that species, right? Because every line of character is defined as a species in this world.
That's right.
And it's a very clear way to communicate that kind of structure and the different characters that those species have in relationship to one another.
And so what I just want to say real quick, just to wrap that up, is that so if we can continue the story, which I really hope to do, because I feel like we've just broken the surface of it, is then we can get into how you realize who you thought was king is just a pawn in the game, and then that keeps on going up. The X-Files did that great, right? You thought the cigarette smoking man was the real power player, and then you realize, no, he's just someone else's bitch. And it's just a whole different level of invisible power that normal people don't even know about.